This is really intended for those of you who are really looking to work on solutions related to the electricity grid. So this morning we had a panel in terms of why ARPA-E is interested in investing in this space. Some examples of the programs that we've already made investments in. And today the goal here was really to help facilitate interactions between the researchers, the scientists, the innovators that ARPA-E is hoping to support, and the stakeholders within the electricity grid. And I think all of us know that the grid itself is something that is important to each and every one of our lives. The National Academy of Engineering, they talk about the electricity grid as being the greatest achievement of mankind in the 20th century. It's the largest machine. It's the largest synchronous system. It's the largest machine that's ever been built. Along with that, the fact that it's ubiquitous, it touches all of our lives, goes with it the complexity of actually being able to inject technological improvements into a system such as this. So ARPA-E has invited 4 panelists to help us really think about engagement. How do we inject technology into the various systems that they think about? So I'm proud to introduce the panelists. So we have David Julius. Yes. David's is coming from the business development at Duke Energy. He's going to help us think about the operating environment for a regulated utility, for a relatively large regulated utility, and really think about how does technology adoption work? You know, what do they look for when they're being approached by an innovator with a new idea? So really try to understand the perspective for innovation from a regulated utility. Complementing this is Ron Binz. So Ron is the chairman of the Colorado PUC, Public Utility Commission. At the end of the day, the decision to be able to deploy new hardware, to pay for that hardware, perhaps by changing the rate base that the consumers pay, is really something that the PUCs are responsible for. And so we'd like to get their perspective in terms of how technology adoption works on the grid. And clearly, hopefully we'll get some chance to ask questions about where is there a gap between the perspectives that a utility might have and the perspectives that a PUC would have. Now, if we actually look at a larger scale, we see that not all of the markets in the United States basically have utilities that are deregulated. There are also independent energy companies. Chief among those would be Constellation Energy. So fortunately, we've got Michael Adams, who's a VP of Corporate Strategy at Constellation Energy, and to, again, give us another perspective for technology adoption within this space. And last but not least, all of these utilities, at least for half the United States, basically play within a market-based mechanism. The largest of those being PJM. So the PJM Interconnection is really a place where the deals for buying and selling electricity are closed for at least half the load in the U.S. We're fortunate to have Chantal Hendrzak. Apologize, Chantal, for the pronunciation. Hopefully that's close. Who's the Director of Applied Solutions at PJM, to talk about how they think about innovation, technology adoption within their space. And so with that, let me start by just turning this over. So we're going to have each of them speak for about 5 to 7 minutes. Then we're going to open it to questions from the audience. And we've got about 20 minutes for questions to basically keep ourselves on schedule. I know this isn't a huge amount of time, but hopefully this gives every one of you a chance to at least hear from the different perspectives and get a chance to engage with them throughout the rest of this week. All right, so with that, let me ask David to come up first and help us see things from his world, from his perspective.
Well, thank you. Again, my name is David Julius, and I work in our Chief Technology Office as a Business Development Manager. And I'll go through these slides really quick because for obvious time, we want to make sure that we guys get plenty of time for questions. So, obviously, fast facts, Duke Energy is currently one of the top 5 utilities in the United States. We're actually in the process of a merger, which, at least for however time mergers with utilities take, will be the largest. But then, they come and go every 5 to 6 months. So, but again, we're primarily an electric utility. We do have some gas that we do sell to some customers, but we have 4 million customers between Indiana, Kentucky, Ohio, and the Carolinas. One thing I want to point out on this, which is going to be key to the grid and the impacts of it, you see all these dots up here, you see all these various power generation facilities, large facilities. With regulation, legislation, and so on hitting us, you're going to see a lot of these dots go away. And so what we see is the grid, what we see is smart grid, energy efficiencies and things that's going to impact and help, eliminate a lot of, one, inefficient plants as well as, not the most energy or not the most environmentally friendly plants as today. So you're going to see a lot of these dots go away. But at the same time, we have to help the folks like at PGM and others to provide the energy they need to get it out in the grid and make sure we're, and also providing our customers the opportunity to understand the efficiencies and help to know that they're a part of the process as well. So again, a little bit about the Chief Technology Group. Again, rather than use some of the words I referred to earlier, talking about disruptive, we use a transformational language for a lot of it. So you talk about the energy storage, you talked about the renewables, smart grid. And then we have supportive. These are all related to our business model, related to EVs, electric, water efficiencies, nuclear, and so on. But I thought that's not the most recent one, excuse me. But to go along with that, I wanted to mention that with the dramatic changes that are happening in the energy industry, you can see a lot of the impacts with regards to the regulation, energy independence by our customers, and climate change impacting the way we see our energy industry going forward. The model with single large assets is no longer going to fit. We're going to have to come up with different means. You're going to start seeing distributed generation. You're going to start seeing rooftop solar and things. So that's why we see as a utility getting involved with the grid and how we're going to make those programs that we have today fit with the idea going forward. The smart grid technologies create this virtual handshake, though, with our customers, so that we can work together to use less energy, save money, as well as create that cleaner, low-carbon environment. The benefits, certainly to customers, we're going to benefit them by providing more reliable service, as well as quicker response, new information and tools, and better manage their energy needs. This is going to be really the thing that we have to provide information to regulators, because if we don't advise our regulators what we're going to be able to, what the value is to the customer, then there's no way smart grid can move forward. One of the slides, and somehow or another got missing, was showing the different components of smart grid. So if you show smart meters up there, smart meters is only one component of smart grid. So if I was just telling you I was going to go out there and put smart meters out there, our regulators would have a difficult time and understand what is the value to our customer. But if you combine smart meters with optimization, with EVs, the whole gamut of the grid components, all the new technologies, then they start seeing the value to the customers, which then gets that buy-in, which not only gives the buy-in for the customers, but also the more the interest in the utility as well to go forward, so that we can effectively manage our grid properly and manage outages and so on going as we see things.
All right, then. Thank you, David. So next, let's bring Ron. Okay. So Ron, again, is chairman of the Colorado Public Utilities Commission. Former chairman. Okay.
I just got either promoted or demoted. I'm not sure which. I'm the former chairman of the Colorado Public Utilities Commission. It's nice to be here. Let me apologize in advance in case I lapse into a paroxysm of coughing. I've got a bad cold, and there's nothing that ARPA or DARPA or anybody else can seem to do about colds. I was appointed to the Public Utilities Commission in 2007 by then Governor Bill Ritter. And for the 4 years that he and I worked together, along with other members of his administration, we brought forth in Colorado what we call the new energy economy. Colorado made some really impressive strides in 4 years, lowering carbon emissions in the industry in the state, bringing businesses to the state, boosting significantly the amount of renewables online. Colorado, if you flip a light switch in Denver, Colorado right now, 1 kilowatt hour of 7 is from renewable resources, and that's heading up to 1 in 3, which I think we will be at somewhere around 2020. So we learned quite a few things in our years of working on this. I wasn't, I like to think, a standard regulator. I have been doing this stuff for a very long time. I've seen it from every side. I've represented interveners before the commission. I've made decisions as commissioner. I was the public advocate. I've been an expert witness in about 100 cases around the country. So I was very familiar with the fabric of regulation. So what I'm going to do today is to confirm some of your biases about regulators and then try and suggest some workarounds. Public utility regulators, and they vary in all of these respects, but public utility regulators tend to be conservative, not in the political sense of conservative, but in the sense of conservative of maintaining the status quo, conserving what we have. And it's not that they don't value technological breakthroughs. I think they mainly see that as somebody else's job and not theirs. So they're conservative, and you will find that regulators across the board, across the country, have a wide variety in how they view their own job. Some of them see it very narrowly in what I call the judicial model. They sit up on the dais and make decisions about cases that are brought before them by utilities. It's kind of like a night court. On the other hand, there are other commissioners, and I would count myself as among them, of thinking that commissioners have a legislative function as well, that you're not just waiting for problems to be brought to you, you're going out and looking for trouble, literally. And that's how we approach regulation in Colorado. And I'm using these terms kind of facilely, but they're actually rooted in legal decisions. The courts have found that rate making, the setting of rates, is actually a legislative activity. Unfortunately for commissions, they have been trapped in sort of judicial, we had everything but the powdered wigs, okay? You know, I ruled on evidentiary motions and all of this. If you've ever been to PUC hearings, you know what I'm talking about. It's pretty stylized and not easily transformed into something which is actually a creative process. So don't expect to take a run cold cock at a regulatory agency and get somewhere. You've got to begin to prepare the ground for that. And one of the things that I found helpful as I watched commissioners who I worked with sort of grow in the job is that they enjoy being educated as to the basics. Some of the most important meetings I had were with vendors who had a particular technology or product they were just dying to tell somebody about. They weren't in there pitching it to me, but years later it came back around in some way. So again, don't expect on your first call to make a sale, but begin, and I would think you might want to do this through your state, some state association. I don't know, you're all over the map in terms of technology, but if you would call yourself clean tech, say, there's almost certainly some kind of clean tech association that you should be working through. If you're renewables, there's certainly some kind of an association you can be working through. Start to get the commissioner to think of his or her the sort of the full value of what they can deliver in doing the job. I would also not neglect the legislature. Now, historically, legislatures spun off the job of utility regulation to commissions. Once upon a time, the legislature literally regulated the monopoly companies. It was the railroads in the early days. But then they decided this is more work than we really want to do, so we created commissions, and around the turn of the century, as early as 1846, I think in Rhode Island's case, legislators created commissions. Now, legislatures tend to maintain a key interest in what their PUCs are doing, and I found it, and I'm confessing this time from the perspective of a regulator, I found it important when a legislator would call me up and say, hey, Ron, I want you to meet with these guys from blank. You know, they're doing blank, and it sounds like something we should be interested in. Now, if they'd come to me, I probably would have given them an audience anyway, but you take my point. It's a good entree to a regulatory agency. Not political pressure. I'm not talking about anything untoward. I'm just talking about you're likely to find with legislators that they are more likely to see the economic development value in what you're talking about. The only other thing that I want to say right now, and I look forward to questions, is one of the things I'm working on since leaving the commission is a new project which hopefully some of you will be hearing about over time. It's called Utilities 2020. And I have a brochure. I've got some with me if anybody wants one later. Utilities 2020 is a foundation-funded project. There's no industry money in it. And our subtitle is Exploring Utility Business Models and the Regulatory Changes Needed to Transform Them. One of the things you're stuck with, and I'm stuck with, we're all stuck with, is a system which is not really up to the challenges of the 21st century. If you look at what is facing utilities, with the proliferation of distributed generation, huge new environmental requirements coming down from the EPA for both criteria pollutants but also for CO2, a relatively tight capital market, flat, if that weren't bad enough, flat to declining sales. That's a recipe for a very tough time. And so I'm of the view that a regulatory bargain has to be rewritten, and I'll be working on that. So thank you all for inviting me. I look forward to questions.
So thank you, Ron. So for yet another perspective, Michael Adams from Constellation Energy.
Thanks. Very happy to be here. Constellation is a sponsor of ARPA-E. We really enjoy the work that ARPA-E is doing and bringing people together. I've been told we're supposed to take 5 to 7 minutes up here with comments. I don't have any slides. What I'm going to try and do is do 2 minutes on who Constellation is, what I do for Constellation to give you context around who we are. Spend 2 minutes talking about what we look to, what Constellation looks to this room and the other participants around ARPA-E to do, what we view as your role. And then spend 2 minutes talking about how we can engage each other to sort of achieve the goals I think we all have in mind. So 2 minutes on Constellation. I work right now for Constellation in our Technology Ventures group. We hatched that inside of corporate strategy in Constellation and launched it about 2 years ago. Think of Constellation in sort of 2 big pieces. I'm going to offer 2 perspectives. One is as a large power producer. We own 12,000 megawatts of generation across the country. Not quite as big as David, but we're up there. And what we have is a diversity in geography and technologies in that fleet that we're always looking to optimize. So I'm going to offer that perspective as an independent power producer owning big assets. The second perspective I want to bring is that of a competitive energy provider. And a lot of markets, including PJM, where we have open access for transmission and open access for customer choice, we compete to serve customers power and gas. Very different than a regulated environment. We are looking to actively win customers' business. We want to supply you power on a long-term basis. And what that's caused in that business is a need to bring them innovative solutions. We want that customer to stay with us for a longer term, which means we're now incented to make them more competitive in their businesses, which means being energy efficient and incorporating new energy technologies into how you manage your energy spend, and also to incorporate technologies to meet your sustainability goals. Those are all things we now in a competitive environment are forced to do, and therefore helps us think about how we engage. So when you think about Constellation, think about we're on sort of the opposite ends of the energy value chain. Not only are we producing power that and diversifying and mix our fleet, but we also are on the downstream end helping customers understand how they manage and use energy on both a short-term and long-term basis. So second 2 minutes, how do we engage? What are we looking to this room to help with? Number one, Constellation doesn't do a lot of R&D. And this is somewhat of a flaw in the way the industry has developed over the years, but therefore we're always looking externally for innovation. We need those big ideas to come from people who are in this room. And we view our job as being that conduit to market for you. If you have that idea, that technology, and you're looking to try and get it to market, we think we can help be that interface for you. The second thing we need from this room is bring your technology. For Constellation, we would love it to be ready to scale. If you're looking for a pilot to prove the data that can get you to a point where you can mass produce this and bring it to a big market, that's where we think when you're ready to engage Constellation. We have 30,000 commercial industrial customers across the country. It's a pretty big footprint. It's also pretty diverse across sectors. So we're looking for that technology at that point that's ready to scale. The other thing we're looking to for this room is have a technology that's interesting enough to compensate us for the risk we would be taking for engaging a new energy technology. It's got to be compelling. It's got to be something that achieves a big ROI so that you incent us to chase it. You incent us to want to bring it to our customers. That's what we're looking for. And the third thing, which I think most people in this room understand, is speed. We are a big energy company, and therefore we're not as fast as we want to be. And so that's the other thing we look to for people in this room for. The last 2 minutes, how to engage us. I am aware Constellation is a very big and diverse energy company. In our business mix, not only do we have competitive power and gas supply, but we also have a load response business, a solar business, an energy efficiency company, all within Constellation, and not to mention our distribution utility, BG&E. This makes us pretty varied, and each of those businesses has different business models. So I recognize that it can be difficult to engage us. And it's possible that you could go outside and ask someone who works for Constellation about Mike Adams, who runs Constellation Technology Ventures, and they probably won't know who I am. That's how big we can be and how hard it is to kind of engage with us. So we recognize that. What I would say is a couple things. You can use us, Technology Ventures, as an entry point to the company. That's part of the role and part of what we try and do for earlier stage technologies. And the second thing, this is an issue I see with a lot of companies engaging with Constellation, is you really need to find two internal advocates. And I'm going to try and generalize to other companies as well. You want to find a technology advocate, that guy who buys into the theory of the technology, thinks it's game-changing, and can carry that towards that this is a workable, viable technology. But you also got to have the other guy, which is the commercial advocate, who recognizes the value this can bring to Constellation business, to one of our customer sets, one of our verticals. If you find the combination of those two things, that's a pretty powerful combination inside the company. And part of my job is to help bring those pieces together for companies that we think are beneficial to our business overall. I hope I hit 2 minutes on each, but that's my remarks for now.
So Mike already talked about playing within this competitive market landscape, and so PJM is obviously the largest market operator, manager, and so we'll hear from Chantal.
Thank you. I hope I can be that good. I'm very impressed. I'm Chantal Hendrzak from PJM. PJM, some of you may know, but we're the largest regional transmission operator. Actually, the second largest in the world. China is growing by leaps and bounds. But we control 13 states within the Eastern Interconnection in the area of D.C., and we're mainly responsible for maintaining the reliability of the grid. We do so by running competitive wholesale energy markets, and the other function that we have is planning for the future in terms of looking at what is going to be required from a transmission perspective to make sure that what wants to interconnect can, and the power's there, and the transmission capacity is there as well. My group within PJM works with all of those different groups, markets, operations, and planning, in addition to has an external focus in bringing new ideas, technologies, methodologies, solutions, both internal to the company and to the grid. We used to be called advanced technologies, but it kind of went the wrong way in terms of implying it was always about technology and implying sort of bleeding edge kind of stuff. And what we really are about is applying solutions. And the solutions can be within our industry, within our country, outside of our industry, and looking at new and different ways to address the challenges we have both today and in the future. So I want to give you sort of 3 tips for working with PJM when you're trying to introduce a new idea. I want to talk to you about how you're going to start with us, where to start, what you can expect in working with us, and then how to get some traction. First is where to start, and this follows up nicely from what Steve Blank was saying earlier, is start with the issue. Don't come with a shiny, cool idea, but you're not really sure what it is you're trying to address. Start with what the customer has in mind, what the issues are. For example, the integration of renewables, the cybersecurity, as we are integrating more and more things from the retail level to the wholesale level, and we have this two-way or n-way communication and control, we need to have cybersecurity baked into that. Big data, as you start introducing synchrophaser technologies or distributed energy resources, we have so much data out there trying to have it make sense and who needs to know what to make it actionable for the operators. Those are some of the issues that we face. And then when we go into this, we want all the ideas. We don't just want to look at things from our industry or only from an engineer's perspective. For example, one of our other challenges for our operators is in all the data that they have today, much less what's coming. So we looked to those folks who are very good at visualization techniques, such as the gaming industry and the video games, to come up with some new paradigms for ways to show our dispatchers how to look at data in a quick glance and identify what they need to worry about and what they don't need to worry about. So keeping open collaboration in mind of all different ideas are what we're interested in. What's the process? What can you expect in working from us? Well, it's not going to be, especially when you're talking about the reliability of the grid, something that's going to happen really fast and overnight. It's going to be baby steps, and it's going to be iterative. And it's what also Steve was talking about, that it's no longer the waterfall approach. We're going to sit down in a meeting and bang out all the requirements, then develop, then test, then implement. We're going to baby step through. We're going to develop some requirements. We're going to test it. We're going to try it out, and then go back to the drawing board. For example, we're working on a tool right now, an online real-time transient stability and analysis application. It's taken us about 18 months to get our transmission owners to adopt this new tool. Because when it comes to talking about reliability and the stability of the grid, we need to make sure that we're comfortable with the results and that our transmission owners who are going to be accepting these values from PJM are comfortable. So while the development was pretty quick, it's the adoption process and going through and getting feedback and trying again and adjusting as we go. That's what it takes to get it into a real-time operating environment like that. And then the third tip is really show me the data. A lot of folks will come with ideas, with white papers, with concepts, which are wonderful. But a lot of our operators, if you are putting this in operations, for example, need to see something that's real and tangible. They're not going to make decisions or adopt something just because it sounds really good or we had a good presentation on all the possibilities of what it can bring. The sooner that we can test things out and see results and see what the data is and learn from it, the more they can touch it and feel it, the more real that it gets. And we saw this when we were introducing a new regulation signal into PJM. We were integrating a battery, weren't sure what its capabilities were going to be or how our regulation signal was going to work with it. And we iterated through a lot of looking at the results, seeing how the battery responded, tweaking our signal, and back and forth. And after about 12 months or so, we finally got it right, such that now we've got a lot more energy storage in our queue because it can operate to the requirements of the signal, and the signal has value to it. So those are the three tips in sort of how you want to bring in something new to PJM and what you can expect when you're working with us. So we're very interested in what ideas that you may have in addressing some of the challenges that I mentioned earlier. Thank you.
So instead of me asking questions of the panelists, I think you've got all four panelists sitting in one place. You know, the RTO, the utilities, the PUC. So I want to make sure that all of you have a chance to ask questions. For those of you who are performers, so maybe we can just open it up and get started. Yeah.
Sure. A lot of technology mentioned. You talked about what to do when you're ready to scale or have something ready to test. Oftentimes, a couple of years earlier, the argument in the right direction is just not something that we did. Do you have interactions with observers and vendors and that?
Yes, I think that just to repeat the question. So the question is about early stage interactions. So before you're ready to do to have some sort of partnership or direct relationship, you just want feedback on the idea. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, we love to provide that feedback. I mean, we actually part of our role is to be there for early stage technology companies, to give them that to be the demand pull is what I call the demand pull. Let me show you what the need is. Let me show you which vertical your technology applies to is somewhat how we view our role. We're not always able to fund those kind of things, but happy to provide the insight.
Very similarly to Duke, I mean, we encourage and welcome entrepreneurs that come in with ideas, and we try to stay engaged as they come up to speed, as their projects move up the scale pathway. And so, very similar to Constellation, we try to provide that conduit of information from a utility's perspective, as well as giving you that information what we think our customers would want, because I think that's ultimately what's going to help that technology succeed going forward.
Okay. There's a microphone over there as well.
Yeah, Ms. Hendrzak, you mentioned that when people come and talk to you, the technology that must be real. In other words, you must be able to see that it solves a particular problem. Now, to what extent is PJM cooperative about sharing data? So, for example, if somebody comes to you with a new way to do contingency analysis or restoration planning, after all, that has to operate on real data, and real data can't come in. So how forthcoming is PJM in sharing the data and evaluating the technology?
Yep, we have can you hear me? We have a couple of different.
You might have to bring it a little closer to you. Okay.
Can you hear me? Okay, there we go. Can you hear me now? Yes, we are. We realize. I mean, you can't just take a 5-bus model and run your tool and see that it's going to work. So we have several different ways to go about that. Certainly NDAs that we put in place to make sure that the information that we share is protected, but in both directions. And then depending on the specific data that it is, if it's critical data, we have another process for handling that too. Sometimes it can be challenging in that it's got to go down to the individual level of people who are working on the projects. But it's important data, and we can work through it so that we are able to get the data and the model into the hands of the people who need to test with it.
Okay, maybe I'll just add 2 things to that. So one is that I know that PJM and FERC are working on a test case that's more representative of PJM's system. That's something that's going to be more generally available, and it's actually due out. It seems like any day now. It's due to be accessible, and so that's something that's going to be widely accessible. And then the other thing I'll tell you is that I mean now that ARPA-E is basically, we have funded projects in the grid, we've seen that actually most RTOs are actually quite willing to basically participate in development projects, provide the data. We've seen New England ISO, MISO, Cal ISO all partner up, and so I think there's at least a good existence proof that is possible to get this kind of data.
I just have one thing to add, because part of our system doesn't operate on an RTO in the Carolinas, and there's actually in the I saw it going into the expo earlier, where we're through ARPA-E with Georgia Tech working on an optimization where we are able to work through the NDA agreements from both directions to be able to share information so they can develop their technologies. So that's firsthand. I've seen that. Work through that.
Okay.
Well, thank you. Bruce Hamilton with Smart Grid Network. Back in July of last year, John McDonald, an executive of GE, said that what's needed to realize the benefits of a smart grid is a smart grid social network. And I thought that was a great idea, and so I obtained the domain name smartgrid.com and created a smart grid social network with a Silicon Valley firm. But now, after seeing Steve's presentation, I know I should have went and interviewed the customers first. My question is, you as customers, if we have a platform that can engage consumers and interact with consumers, from ARPA-E's side, we've seen social media sites change countries and societies. We could use social media to generate a swelling of support for smart grid or clean energy. Is that something that ARPA-E is interested in promoting? In the emerging ideas session we saw this morning on talk on real-time pricing, there was a comment from the field that it may be better to just engineer out the customer and come up with solutions that you don't need to engage or consult with the consumer. From the utility side, is it sufficient for the utility to convince the regulator on the benefits of the smart grid and get funding approved for smart grid rollouts? Or do you need to engage consumers and not just speak to consumers, but hear back and have a dialogue with consumers? Okay. From the regulator side, do you see it being important as well for the regulator to provide tools that allow consumers to engage? And also from the market operator side, do you see value in this type of approach?
So maybe just to make the question a little shorter, so in terms of the voice of the customer, what role does it play when you're making decisions regarding smart grid, basically from the utility and the perspective of the regulator? So, Ron?
Well, besides being a former commissioner, I have another client who's a smart grid platform provider, Tendril, and they're finding that the social media aspect of their portal is really paying off, that when you go to a neighborhood, people are making recommendations to each other. It's taken off. And I guess the thing that I want to say about that is that we need to find something we don't have to do all the work of convincing people to use. I mean, it needs to sort of spontaneously catch on, right? And that's what we really want. If we've learned nothing from the success of some of the major players in social media, is that all it does is it takes a society to know that it's there and then it catches on. That's exactly what we need here. So as regulator, yeah, I'm very interested in what people think about this stuff. And responding to something else you say, I don't think we want to try to engineer around the customer. I don't think that's going to work. I'm going to have a discussion with Timothy about that later today. But I think that regulators need to get serious about a smart grid market, and there's one keystone preventing that from happening, and that's usage-sensitive pricing or dynamic pricing. And I think that's going to be the next big block to fall.
I'll say one thing. Customer engagement is certainly a priority for us, especially in our customer supply business. We haven't figured out the best way to achieve the engagement, and whether or not social networking is the way in which we achieve that, I think is kind of the jury's still out a little bit.
And from the ARPA-E's perspective, actually, we do have an existing program under FOA1, which is really looking at social networking, games-based engagement around electricity usage. So this is a project that was led by Stanford and had Google participating in it. So I think it's something you might want to look into. It's certainly not outside of the things that we've funded in the past.
Thank you very much.
Okay. So next question.
Hello, I'm Bill Acker from New York BEST, New York Battery and Energy Storage Technology Consortium. First, I'd like to thank you for pointing out what is frequently a gap between what technology developers are doing and what the industry needs with regard to the amount of data and the amount of proof and confidence that we have in devices as we put them on the grid. As we talk to a lot of people that are developing the technology and really do not appreciate the degree of which we need reliability and proven pieces on the grid. And we are developing a commercialization center that's going to address a great deal of testing in New York to be able to help with this. But I want to put the question more generally back to you as far as the longevity testing of things like energy storage devices and the like. We see a gap in the ability to do that and to be able to develop enough data that makes your firms confident to go from demonstration to projects to real mass deployment. And I'd like to get your views on, is there a need in that area?
You're absolutely correct. Actually, there is a data gap. In fact, we've just, within the last 3 or 4 months, put some energy storage devices in the ground. And we've learned a lot over that period of time. But we're talking, we know we need to have more than just 3 to 4 months worth of data. We need to have more like a year. It'd be great to have 18 months to 2 years worth of data to go through a complete cyclical get complete cyclical analysis of what that life expectancy, how that battery would charge and discharge. So you're absolutely correct, and that's the hardest thing for even in our company as you look at these technologies is the time that it might take to develop these technologies. A lot of things that we see in our industry, you can try something out in a plant, you can try something out in the field, and you can see immediate. But with the battery, it's something you have to you've got a gap. You've got to take some time in order to make sure they work properly. And in some cases, we've had to pull some out of the ground, redo some functionality, and put them back in. And we're kind of starting over from scratch in that case.
And to speak from some of PJM's experience, some of it depends on what role that technology is going to play. So, for example, when we were working with the one battery to integrate it into the regulation market, and it was the first time energy storage was able to serve as an asset in the regulation market, it took us about a year or so to tweak the signal and for them to configure their algorithms. Initially started that they could participate about 75% of the time in the market, which wasn't going to be sustainable from a revenue perspective. But then between us kind of getting the signal right for all energy storage, not just the one particular technology, and them working on their side to make the configurations, I think we got it right. Then they can bid into the market and participate in the market as much as they are available. And as long as it's responding to us, that's great. If you want to look at a battery, a new challenge that we're facing right now is can you consider energy storage as a transmission asset? It's a different story. How do you plan for it? How do you operate it? What is it? And we talked about models. Steve Blank was talking about models. We don't exactly know what the plan is or how to operate that. The closest thing we have in some scenarios is hydro, but it's not quite hydro. So something like that is going to take a lot longer to understand the capabilities and how does it operate and how long will it be there for and how do we plan for it and what's the capacity factor and how do we operate it in real time. So the time frame to use some of these technologies can depend on what role it plays. But it does take a while, and it does take data and understanding.
And just to kind of stress how important the problem is, I mean, right now there is an RFI that's on the street that came out just a few weeks ago from ARPA-E, which is really looking at just in general understanding any sort of energy storage system. How do you basically create sensors to monitor state of health so you actually know what the state of health is? How do you model things? And one of the hard nuts of modeling is actually being able to predict aging. So there's an RFI that's basically open, that's basically looking for comments and input from the community in terms of understanding that, and actually has a non-trivial role to play in secondary markets where you take you recycle batteries from electric vehicles, you want to put them on the grid. It's kind of a scary thing to do if you don't know what the state of health of the battery is and you can't model how that asset's going to age. So it's something that we're aware of. I think we all kind of agree it's a critical problem regarding storage integration. But we do have an RFI, and we encourage you guys to respond to that.
Thank you.
Thanks.
I'm Mitzi Worth. I'm with the Naval Postgraduate School. Ron, I wanted to ask, what's your relationship with FERC? And David, there was an article in the Washington Post a few months ago about how Duke has changed I think this is what it said, basically changed the behavior in Charlotte about how the community responds to energy, and they're being much more responsible citizens. How did you do that?
So maybe you want to start with Ron and FERC while David thinks about it.
Colorado is a vertically integrated market. That is, the utility owns its generation, and there's not an ISO RTO. So our interface with FERC is actually fairly minimal. FERC has jurisdiction over wholesale purchase power sales, and the state runs retail. And there's no RTO, which, of course, FERC rules designate in the other parts of the country. So I know John Wellinghoff. I've known him for many, many years, but we didn't have a lot to do with each other.
David?
I don't want to say I'm going to bail on this question, but just say I just moved to Charlotte. But no, the way we try to engage our customers, not only in Charlotte but in the other areas of the country we operate, we've tried to put technology information out there. We try to we're very proactive, much like it was talked about earlier, where we're trying to engage. We have with the line sensing devices, with our smart nodes, smart grids that we're trying. We've actually gone out to we got a specific substation where we're trying all this technology out, and have been out there literally hand-holding, because we're learning it just along with our customers in some cases. So we really try to engage them, and we're trying to promote and sharing that with the area of Charlotte, so they understand what could be coming down the pike and going forward in the future. So we've been very proactive in that approach and being engaged with having our communication people engaged with the press and the city commissioners and the city and the mayor and so on in Charlotte. So been taking a very, very proactive approach in that. And we've done very similar in the other areas. It's just because of the size of Charlotte, it's certainly much more visible. But we've done very much the same thing in the Cincinnati and the other large areas that we operate in.
Next question.
Hi, I'm Nick Cizik. I'm an ARPA-E fellow. I was curious, as we work with our performers, our awardees to develop new technologies to go onto the grid, are you the people that they need to talk to, or how do we find the right person for them to talk to at your organizations and organizations like yours?
I guess I'm as good as any. There are good places and bad places to start. Like as I said at the top, if you can find a good technology advocate, that's at some part of the engineering level of the organization, that's a positive. But you got to have that engineering advocate also find a commercial advocate. If you can find a commercial advocate, that's a good positive too. And sometimes that commercial advocate can actually be a customer. That we serve power to. If they're coming to us and saying, look, we use this technology, we think it's really interesting, can you incorporate it into the power you serve? That's a real positive. Coming from the top down is harder because you still need to find both of those, technology advocate and the commercial advocate, inside the organization, inside the business unit that it applies to. But so I would say there's a variety of places to start, and I'm certainly one of them.
To agree, I would say the same thing. I mean, certainly our technology office is the prime location to start with, but I'm sure Constellation has the same. But our websites have the mechanisms in place to get in touch with our corporate communications, with in turn push that information to us, to our technology office. I know on a routine, almost weekly basis, I get an email and say, hey, we just got this technology that just came in through our website. Could you take a look at it? So I get that. I know I get that, and my other colleagues that look at the other technologies get that as well. So I think that's another avenue.
And for PJM, yep, it's me. But if you also go to our website, we have an area where we talk about pilot programs. And if you have an idea or something that you're trying to move forward a little bit or want feedback on, there's a process that you can follow through. You just click on the thing and it walks you through. But the other thing is PJM is relatively small, 600 employees. So you come in, you can kind of talk to anybody, and you start saying technology, pilot, they'll say, okay, and they'll quickly be routed to us. So you can get us.
Is that standard across? Oh, go ahead, Ron.
Well, I just want to mention Public Utility Commission staffs are just filled with engineers who would like to have an interesting day. And you could easily be that. I would approach a PUC by going to its electricity and power staff.
And is that typical for other PUC or other energy companies? That they have a web page, or not that they have a web page, but that they have a conduit that actually is active?
I know I have a couple peers, if I, off the top of my head, from, ISO New England and MISO and Cal ISO, for example. So there are people like me that exist in the other ISOs and RTOs.
I'll say this, the trend is that way, but it doesn't always exist. My role didn't exist 2 years ago inside Constellation, and I don't know when the CTO office was formed at Duke, but it's not always the rule, but it's trending that way.
Guy Allais from Intel. About 120 years ago, we made a decision to go with AC for our electric system. And since semiconductors showed up, the load base has become increasingly DC. New forms of, I think it's 80% on new products today, have power electronics in them. The load base is changing to direct current. Alternate energy sources, distributed storage are all changing to direct current. As representatives of each segment of the industry in the regulation process, how do you see this coming out? Does this blow up as unsustainable disconnect, or does the industry work its way through moving to an all DC grid?
Go ahead.
I see it as a huge opportunity for people making inverters. I mean, as he described at the top, the machine we built in the grid is over 120 years. It's also a lot of capital invested. It's hard for me to foresee changing over wholesale operations to a DC. It's just because of the pure expense. But independent, individual transmission lines, I think could probably see a little bit more of it.
No, and you're absolutely right in that we're talking more and more about power electronics and the need for HVDC and inverters and all sorts of things like that. I me personally don't see that wholesale switch over, but absolutely, how are they going to be integrated and how are we going to work with that? And there's a definite need for advancement and innovation in that area.
Okay, maybe we'll take one last question.
So I know the word propaganda has like really bad connotation, but I talk to people, just normal customers, about new emerging technologies, and either they don't think there's a need for it because they have false information, or they're afraid of things like nuclear power. Who can get the ball rolling to just inform people about like new, safer nuclear technologies and why we do need to push forward? Because people not only are your customers, but they also elect the people who make the policies that drive these new products.
So I guess the question is, who has the role to basically educate the public regarding new alternative energies?
Well, I'm a proponent of the book Nudge, and one thing it says is that basically people in a position to make certain decisions need to do that, setting up channels or batter boards within which people make those decisions. And just lost the voice, guys.
I'm not familiar with the book, so I can't fill in the blanks. But, I mean, what comes to mind is we all have a role in doing that, and the specific roles we play depend on, where we're coming from and the data that we have to offer and, our perspectives. But together, we support what's needed for the future and how to get there. So I say we all have a role.
So, I think, the last few comments I want to make, so I'm sort of the eternal optimist. And I think the one thing I want to convey to all of you is, while you see the electricity grid as being this large, daunting machine, it's a complicated structure with regulators, very close at the state and the federal level. It's a deregulated markets, regulated utilities, all playing together in the same space. I think the one thing I've learned over the course of the last couple of years here at ARPA-E is that, in the utility, there actually are incredibly progressive, tech-savvy commissioners. These are elected officials who are excited about technology, who are interested in hearing about something that you do that actually solves a problem. And, I've met with PUCs in Wisconsin, Ohio, and now Colorado. And I think hopefully you see that, the barrier to basically discussing things with these regulators is really not quite as high as you might think it might be. And just like Ron says, I think I haven't met a commissioner yet who's not interested in at least having someone, either them directly or someone on their staff, talk to you about what you might be able to offer as a solution. I think the same thing ends up being true in terms of the RTOs. I think Chantal didn't talk about this, but I think you should all know that in addition to the pilot program with storage, there's how many other pilot programs that are underway at PJM right now? 25. Yeah, about 25 other programs. And see, some of these programs are incredibly early stage. Just hearing the story of where the first storage pilot came from, it was a very, very early stage pilot. It kind of started out as almost as an idea where they weren't really ready they didn't have a battery yet. Yep. And so I think the barrier to entry, I think once you really start to get engaged and you understand what is the problem that you're solving, what is your value proposition, is lower than we perceive it to be. I think it's, admittedly this is maybe somewhat optimistic. Clearly our tech to market team has done an incredible job choosing these support panelists, ones who are receptive, who are progressive, who basically are ready to engage with you, and clearly based on the discussion that we've had, these are the guys that you want to talk to when you're actually thinking about rolling out new technology for the grid. And so with that last comment, could you all help me thank the panelists for helping?